Arizona Territory, May 1883. The wind smelled of dust and blood when Liora Zell ran. Her boots slapped against the hard-packed desert road, lungs tearing for air, her shawl half torn off her shoulders. The sun was sinking low behind the jagged cliffs near Dry Creek, but she did not dare stop. Not even to look back. Not even when her legs buckled and she scraped her palms raw on the rocks and sand. She had left everything behind in Cedar, past her job at the millinery, the little rented room above the store, the shame she had carried like a second skin. But that town had never been a home. It had been a cage. And today, when the sheriff looked her dead in the eye and said there was nothing he could do about a man and his wife, something inside her snapped loud enough to make the whole world shift. She had not been his wife. Never would be. And now she was running. The desert stretched wide and empty ahead of her, but she kept going until the only sound left was the beat of her heart and the crunch of gravel under her feet. By the time night fell, her feet were blistered, her dress torn, and her voice hoarse from thirst. The moon rose full and bright, throwing silver over the land. Coyotes howled in the distance. Liora collapsed near a dry riverbed, curled herself up small, and tried not to cry. She did not remember falling asleep. When she woke, a man was kneeling beside her. "Easy," he said, voice deep and quiet. "You're all right." Her eyes flew open and she scrambled back, fists raised, but her body screamed in protest. Pain flared in her arms and ribs. She could not hide the wince. The man held his hands up. "I am not here to hurt you." He was broad-shouldered, with sun-dark skin and a worn hat pushed back from his face. His shirt was faded, the sleeves rolled, and his eyes were soft as the sky at dawn. "I saw you fall near my line shack. Thought you were a ghost at first," he said. "Name's Rowan Fletcher. I run cattle up in the mesas." She stared at him, chest heaving. "Do not touch me." "I will not," he said gently. "You are bleeding." He pointed to her arm. Liora looked down. Her forearm was crusted with blood and sand. She had not even felt it. He knelt again, slower this time. "There's water. Not far. I can carry you, or you can lean on me. Your choice." Her pride screamed at her to stand on her own, but her body would not obey. She nodded once. Rowan helped her up, careful not to touch more than he had to. He let her lean into his side, steady as a tree, and together they limped to a small stone cabin tucked between rocks. It looked like it had been built by hand, plank by plank. Inside, it was clean but sparse. A cot, a stove, a low table, a battered trunk. He eased her down onto the bed and handed her a tin cup of water. She drank like a woman starved. "You want me to get a doctor from town?" he asked. "No," she said quickly. "No towns." He nodded once, no questions. "Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated. But something in his voice, steady, unhurried, made her speak. "Liora Zell." Rowan crouched by the stove and lit a fire. "You got folks looking for you?" "No," she said, her voice cracked. "No one at all." He looked at her then, really looked. Her lip was split, one cheek was purpled. And there were old bruises too, yellowing at the edges, hidden under fabric and fear. Rowan did not ask who had done it. Instead, he pulled a clean cloth from a drawer, soaked it in warm water, and offered it to her. "Let me help," he said. She did not move at first. But when he stayed quiet, just holding it out, she reached for the cloth. Her fingers brushed his. The rest of that night passed in silence. Liora cleaned her wounds. Rowan made her a bowl of beans and cornbread. She ate slowly, eyes flicking to the door as if expecting someone to burst through. He noticed, but said nothing. Afterward, he walked outside and gave her space. The moon was still high when she stepped out onto the porch. He was sitting on the edge with a blanket over his shoulders, staring out at the desert. She sat beside him. "You live out here alone?" "I do." "Why?" Rowan shrugged. "Lost my brother in the war, parents died after. Town never felt like home after that." Liora nodded. "I know that feeling." They sat side by side, not touching, just breathing the same air. "I will leave come morning," she said quietly. "You do not have to," he replied. She looked at him, startled. "I have work on the land, fences to mend, livestock to tend. You stay as long as you need." "No strings." "No one does anything without strings." "I do." She turned her eyes back to the desert. In the distance, a pack of coyotes yipped and yowled. "Someone hurt you bad," Rowan said, not looking at her. He said, "I belong to him." "You do not." She swallowed hard. "He will come looking. Then he will find me." She stared at him. His jaw was set, eyes steady, voice low but sure. He looked like a man who had fought his own ghosts and won. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "I know enough." The wind shifted, warm and dry, rustling the brush below. Liora wrapped her arms around herself. "I do not know how to be safe." Rowan looked at her, then slowly reached out and laid a hand over hers. He did not squeeze, just rested there, solid, steady. "You are safe here," he said softly. "I swear it." Under the desert moon, with her hands trembling under his, Liora let herself breathe for the first time in years. She did not know what tomorrow held. But for now, here, beside this quiet cowboy with eyes like dusk, she felt something she had not felt in a long, long time: hope. The next morning, the desert light stretched long and pale across the cabin floor, filtering through the thin curtains Rowan had hung years back from a trader's wagon. Liora stirred, her breath shallow, still caught between sleep and that raw place where fear had once lived. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then the smell of juniper smoke and the faint creak of boots outside settled her. She sat up carefully, her muscles protesting. Her left hand went to her ribs instinctively, but the pain was duller now. She glanced around. A folded shirt rested on the chair beside the cot, clean, patched in places. Not hers. She eased her way out to the porch barefoot. Rowan stood a few yards off, digging a fence post into the hard ground. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat. A small herd of longhorns grazed lazily beyond, tails flicking at flies. "You got a shovel I can use?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse, but she held it steady. Rowan didn't look surprised. "In the lean-to." "Handle's cracked, but it'll hold." She found it where he said, propped beside a barrel full of iron tools. The sun was already high, the air dry as old paper. Her palms burned against the worn wood, but she set to work anyway, clearing brush along the creek where water still pooled in shaded bends. He didn't stop her. Just nodded once when she passed him, and again when she returned with a bundle of thistle and stones. They worked in silence until midday when Rowan called out, "That's enough for now. Come sit." She hesitated, then followed him to a patch of shade beneath a crooked mesquite. He passed her a strip of jerky and a boiled egg wrapped in cloth. They ate without ceremony. "I used to think about running," she said after a while, brushing eggshell from her lap. "More times than I can count, but I never knew where I'd go." Rowan drank from his canteen, then handed it to her. "Sometimes it's not about where, just away." She took a long pull. "He always said no one take me in, that I'd be crawling back by nightfall." His eyes met hers. He was wrong. Liora looked down at her hands. The creases were deep with dirt, her nails cracked. "You don't ask much, do you?" "I figure people say things when they're ready." She studied him. "You always live this quiet?" Rowan leaned back against the tree, folding his arms. "Had enough noise in younger days. I like the still." "You get lonely." He didn't answer right away, just looked out toward the hills where the horizon shimmered. "Sometimes." She waited. He turned back to her. "But it's a clean kind of lonely, doesn't bite." Liora looked at the calluses on her hands. "Mine bites." Rowan's gaze lingered on her face, thoughtful. "You want to stay a while, there's room, I won't expect anything." She met his eyes. "What if I want to help?" "You already are." They stood then, side by side, and walked back toward the cabin. That afternoon, she mended a tear in the saddle blanket while Rowan oiled harnesses by the corral. They didn't speak again until the sun dropped low. He brought out a lantern and set it on the porch. She sat beside it, hands warm from the stitching. "I used to sew hats," she said, fingers brushing the hem of her skirt. "Feathers, lace, sometimes ribbon if the store could get it in from Prescott." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "You liked it?" "I liked what it made me forget." He nodded, understanding without asking more. The wind cooled as night fell, carrying the scent of creosote and the faint rustle of something moving through the brush. Rowan stood, stretched his shoulders, then looked to her. You want me to show you the spring tomorrow? It's a walk, but there's shade most the way. Liora considered, then nodded. I'd like that. He picked up his coat from the rail. I sleep out in the barn most nights. It's cooler. She watched him step off into the dark, his figure fading into the blue hush of evening. A coyote called somewhere beyond the ridge. Inside, she lit a stub of candle and sat on the edge of the cot, her hands curled around the thin blanket. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in memory, she wasn't bracing for the worst. The silence around her was wide, but it no longer frightened her. It felt like something waiting to be filled. She lay down, and when she closed her eyes, her breath came easier. By the time they reached the spring, Leora's braid had come loose, and her boots were slick with red dust. The path wound narrow between outcrops of rock the color of rusted iron, shaded now and then by thickets of desert willow and rabbit brush. Rowan walked ahead, clearing thorny branches with a hooked stick, his steps measured to match her slower ones. The spring itself was little more than a hollow in the rock, but the water was clear and cold, tucked under the shade of cottonwoods whose roots had split the stone over time. Liora knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, then sat back on her heels, quiet. Rowan eased down beside her, pulling a piece of rawhide from his pocket and beginning to rewrap the grip of his knife. His hands moved steady, practiced. You always carry that? She asked, resting her arms on her knees. He nodded. Used to trap with it, before cattle, before this place even. She glanced toward him. Where were you before? Colorado territory, up near the San Juans. My brother and I tried silver mining for a while. She watched the way the sun caught the scar that curved along his forearm, thin and pale against sun-dark skin. Didn't last, she asked. Didn't suit us. We weren't made for crawl spaces and ice water. We came south and started over. You stayed. He didn't. Rowan didn't answer right away. He finished wrapping the grip, then tested the weight with a flick of his wrist. He got sick. Winter of '72, Leora's gaze stayed on the water. I'm sorry. He shrugged once, but it wasn't careless. He was the only person I ever trusted back then. You don't talk much about it. Not much to say that changes anything. They sat in the shade, the only sound the wind combing through the willows and the soft trickle of water over stone. After a while, Liora leaned back against a warm rock and closed her eyes. I used to imagine places like this, she said. Somewhere quiet, where people didn't ask questions with their eyes. Rowan stood and walked a few paces out, scanning the ridge. You don't have to imagine now. I don't know what to do with it, she said, opening her eyes. He turned back toward her. You don't have to know yet. They didn't speak again until the sun dipped behind the rock face and the shadows deepened. On the walk back, Liora asked about the scrub plants they passed, and he named each one Kala, Ocotillo, mesquite. He showed her how to break open a prickly pear pad without cutting herself. She tasted the fruit, surprised at the sweetness. That evening, Rowan brought out a small tin box from the trunk by the stove. Inside were bits and ends old coins, a broken watch chain, a pencil stub. He handed her a folded scrap of paper. What's this? She asked, smoothing it open. Land deed. This cabin and the grazing rights. Signed it with my brother the year before he passed. You kept it all this time, didn't have much else to hold on to. Liora studied the faded ink, the careful handwriting. You ever think about leaving? I did. But the land stayed, so I did too. She passed the paper back. It's strange. I never had a place that was mine long enough to miss. Rowan tucked the deed away. You could. She turned toward the hearth where a faint flame flickered under the kettle. I wouldn't know how to begin. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You've already started. Later, when the dishes were washed and the light dimmed, she stood in the doorway and listened to the night sounds, the distant hoot of an owl, the creak of the barn as it settled in the cooling dark. I was told once I was too much trouble to keep, she said, not turning. Rowan's voice came from behind her, quiet but certain. Whoever said that never knew the worth of a steady heart. She looked over her shoulder. You think I have one? I've seen it. They stood facing each other in the hush before sleep. No promises passed between them, nothing pressed. Just the quiet acknowledgement of something building, slow and solid as stone. When Liora lay down that night, she didn't curl inward. She stretched her legs full beneath the quilt and let her hands rest open at her sides. The air smelled of dust and pine smoke. Somewhere nearby, Rowan's steps crossed from the porch to the barn. She closed her eyes, not to escape, but to rest. For the first time in years, that difference mattered. The summer heat deepened as June pressed in heavy and slow. The days stretched long, and the work changed with them, less mending, more hauling, more watching the sky for signs of storm. Rowan shifted the cattle higher into the hills, where the grass held green a little longer. Liora rode with him now, legs sore from the saddle but steady. The horses knew her voice. One morning she waited by the corral with a coil of rope in her hands, watching Rowan run the saddle girth through his fingers. He glanced up. "You've got a careful eye," he said. "Most folks don't notice when the leather starts to split. I learned quick." Stitching hats wasn't so different, just smaller needles. Rowan nodded once and tied off the strap. "You thinking of doing something with that?" "I might," she said. "If I stay." He looked at her then, not questioning, just listening. "I've been drawing designs," she added. "Not just for hats, moccasin soles, gloves, saddle skirts. I remember what customers used to ask for. I thought maybe I could trade work for goods." "You do well," Rowan said. "There's a trading post 2 days north. Fella up there buys handwork. He's fair." "I'd need you to take me," she said, tone quiet but firm. "I will." They rode out 2 days later, just after dawn, taking the pack mule and enough water for the trail. The journey followed a dry wash for most of the first day, the mesas rising like sleeping beasts along the horizon. They camped under a stand of juniper that night, fire low, the coals tucked in rock to keep the wind from catching them. Rowan sat with a knife and a piece of cedar, carving slow, patient strokes. Liora leaned back against the saddlebag, her head tilted toward the stars. "You always carve at night?" she asked. "When I can." "What is it?" He held up the piece. A bird, wings tucked mid-flight, the grain of the wood catching light in the hollow of its chest. "I used to make them for my brother," Rowan said. "He kept them in his pocket. Said they brought luck." Liora reached out, brushing the curve of the wings with her thumb. "You still believe that?" "I don't know," he said, "but I keep making them." She sat quiet after that, watching the shadows shift across his face. The silence between them was no longer uncertain. It was full. The next morning they reached the trading post by noon. The man there, Mr. Harlan, was older with a stiff gait and a narrow face. He studied Liora's samples with a careful eye, flattening each piece on the counter before nodding once. "I could use a set like this," he said. "Folks up from Fort Verde been asking for finer stitching." Liora didn't smile, but her eyes held something just short of wonder. "I can have more by August. You get it here, I'll buy it." Outside, the sun cut sharp across the yard. Rowan adjusted the mule's pack while Liora stood by the well, hands wrapped around the pump handle. "He said yes," she said, like it hadn't fully landed yet. Rowan tied down the last strap. "I knew he would." They camped again on the ride home, this time near a narrow stream nestled in the folds of a canyon. Rowan caught 2 trout by dusk and cooked them on a flat stone. Liora watched him, her knees pulled to her chest. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it means to belong somewhere." Rowan turned the fish with the tip of his knife. "And I think it's less about land or walls, more about how you're seen." He handed her a strip of fish. "You feel seen here," she took it, nodding slowly. "Not just seen." "Known." Rowan didn't answer with words. He met her gaze and held it, something unspoken passing between them that didn't need shaping. Later, as the fire burned low, Liora stepped into the space beside him. She didn't ask, and he didn't move away. Her shoulder pressed against his, warm and certain. When they returned to the homestead, the days settled into new rhythm. Liora stitched in the mornings, rode out in the afternoons. Rowan taught her how to read the signs of a coming storm, how the birds went still, how the wind changed direction just before the clouds broke. One evening she stood barefoot by the fence, a length of cloth in her hand, her hair unbraided and loose. Rowan approached from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "I've been thinking about building something," she said. He stopped beside her. "What kind?" "A small workhouse. Just behind the cabin. I could keep the tools there, the fabric, maybe even take orders." He looked out over the space she meant. "We can start tomorrow." She turned toward him. "I want to build it together." Rowan's voice was low. "Then we will." Their hands brushed, and this time neither pulled away. The wind carried the scent of sage and warm soil. The horizon burned soft with the colors of approaching dusk. Liora looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just the man who had offered her shelter or safety, but the quiet, steady soul who had never asked her to be anything but whole. "I don't want to leave," she said. "You don't have to." She stepped closer. "Not just the land." "I mean this." Rowan's eyes didn't shift. "Neither do I." The space between them closed without urgency. His hand found hers, calloused and warm. She leaned into him, her forehead resting just beneath his jaw, and he held her without hesitation. The wind stilled, the night came on slow. And for the first time since she'd fled that broken town, Liora let herself believe in permanence. Not the kind written in law or spoken behind closed doors, but the kind forged in every shared silence, every small act of seeing and being seen. They stood there until the stars returned. Together. Steady. Home. Liora stepped back and studied the frame Rowan had raised along the north side of the cabin. The walls weren't yet closed in, but the beams stood square and solid, the posts sunk deep into the earth. She wiped her brow with the heel of her hand, her skin streaked with sawdust and sweat. The air was dry, the kind that stripped moisture from breath and left silence hanging thick between sound. Rowan approached from the trees, carrying a rough-cut door plank over his shoulder. He set it down and glanced at the sky, where faint traces of cloud floated near the far ridgeline. "You think it'll hold through the monsoon?" she asked, nodding toward the frame. "We'll brace it with crossbeams before July," Rowan said. "I'll notch the joints deeper, it won't move." She ran her fingers along the edge of the window opening. "I want it to face east. You'll catch the morning light that way." "I know." Rowan leaned against the beam beside her. "You still thinking about riding up to Verd once the work's done?" "I am," she said. "Mr. Harlan told me last time he'd introduce me to a woman who does silver work. She might know someone needing steady hands." He glanced down at her fingers. "You're not looking to leave?" "No," she said. "I'm looking to bring more back." They worked until the light began to fade, the sun pulling long shadows across the clearing. Liora packed away the tools while Rowan fetched water from the barrel. A hawk circled high overhead, wings stretched wide against the last of the light. Inside, the cabin held the warmth of late day. Liora set a kettle on the stove and reached for the cloth bundle she'd kept under the cot since returning from the trading post. She unwrapped it carefully and laid the contents on the table: 3 folded muslin patterns, a pair of tin snips, and a strip of pale blue ribbon. Rowan came in as she was sorting through the pieces. "You working tonight?" "Just fitting a collar," she said. "For the sample waistcoat, if it turns out, I'll send it with the next order." He crossed to her side. "The ribbon's new. I traded for it." Thought it might catch someone's eye. He picked it up and turned it over in his hands. "It matches your eyes." She looked up. "Does it?" He didn't answer, just stepped closer, the ribbon still between his fingers. "Liora, I've been thinking." She held his gaze. "Tell me." "I never planned for anything beyond this land. After Elias passed, I figured I'd see out my days raising cattle and fixing things as they broke. I didn't expect company." She folded her hands together, the edge of the muslin brushing her wrist. "And now I want to build something that doesn't end with me." Leora's throat tightened. "You mean the workhouse?" "I mean a life with you." She took the ribbon from his hand and laid it flat on the table. "I didn't know what safety felt like until I had it. Not just from harm, but from being unseen. You gave that to me." He reached for her then, slow and sure, his hand curling around hers with quiet certainty. She stepped into his arms, her head resting against his chest. The stove crackled behind them, and outside the breeze shifted through the trees, carrying the first notes of summer's edge. They married in July, under the cottonwoods by the spring. There were no guests, only the land and the sky, and a promise spoken in voices low and certain. Rowan carved a pair of rings from desert ironwood, polished smooth with river stone. Liora wore hers on a ribbon at her throat, tied close to her skin. The workhouse stood finished by harvest, its walls sealed tight against wind and rain. Liora filled it with her tools, her patterns, and a ledger she kept in neat, careful script. Orders came slow at first, then steady. Rowan added a second stall to the barn, and they brought in 2 more horses before the frost. When winter settled, they read by lamplight, Leora's stitching in her lap, Rowan's carvings growing in number on the shelf above the hearth. Some nights they walked the edge of the property, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground, the stars bright enough to see by. In spring, a letter came from Mr. Harlan, asking if Liora would be willing to teach a younger woman in Prescott who'd taken an interest in fine sewing. She read it aloud at the table, sunlight warming the floor at her feet. "You want to go?" Rowan asked. She folded the letter carefully. "No. I want her to come here." Rowan smiled, eyes soft. "Then we'll make space." They added a second cot to the workhouse that summer and cleared a corner for extra supplies. The girl arrived on horseback 2 weeks later, dusty and nervous. Liora took her hand and showed her the patterns, the way the needle moved clean through the leather. Rowan built a porch bench that fall, and they sat there often, watching the light fade behind the hills. On one such evening, Liora leaned her head on his shoulder, hand resting over his. "I used to think no place could hold me," she said. He tilted his face toward hers. "And now I know I was just waiting to find the one that fit." The wind stirred the grass, and somewhere beyond the trees a bird called low and steady. They stayed like that as the sky turned to dusk. Together, unshaken, home.